Welcome to Wayward Writers. I'm Senior Literary Agent and author Heather Cashman.
I'm author and writing coach Stephanie Bearce.
And I'm author and writing coach Nicki Jacobsmeyer.
Our mission is to nurture and enrich established writers throughout their publishing journeys.
We welcome all genres, age groups, and publishing paths through video podcasts, online webinars, in-person retreats, and more.
We're here to help you conquer your path.
We're here today with historical fiction writer Pat Wahler. We're so grateful to have you with us today. Nicki, will you tell us more about Pat?
Absolutely. It'd be my honor. Pat and I are in a writing group together. So I am very blessed that I get to see her often and pick her brain. So Pat Wahler is a winner of Western Fictionary's Best First Novel of 2018, a Walter Williams Award winner, and the winner of Author Circle Awards 2019 Novel of Excellence in Historical Fiction for I Am Mrs. Jessie James. Her newest novel, The Rose of Washington Square, is a winner of the Missouri Writers Guild Show Me Your Best Award and named a 5-star highly recommended novel by the Historical Fiction Company. Her book was also featured on the History Channel's This Week in History's podcast in 2023. Other books by Pat include a 3-book contemporary romance series and 2 holiday-themed books, all named 5-star readers' favorites. A frequent contributor to Chicken Soup of the Soul anthology, Pat is an avid reader with a special passion for historical fiction, women's fiction, and stories with heart. She makes her home in Missouri with her husband and 2 rescue critters, one feisty peekaboo pup and a tabby cat with plenty of attitude. Pat, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, your credentials obviously speak highly of you, even if we didn't know you on a personal level. So I'm really interested if you could share with us about when you started writing and your journey as it is up to now.
Absolutely. Like most writers, I started out as a very avid reader. I think the folks who are reading all the time from childhood on up, at one time or another, it crosses their mind, maybe I could write a book someday, but it never happens. As a kid, I played around a little bit with fan fiction, which is a neat way to start because you know the characters already. You don't have to create them from scratch. So I was like having a grand old time. I can do better than what that episode was. I can fix that. I can make it the way I like it. Gunsmoke was one I did. Big Valley, Star Trek.
That's awesome.
Those were, I'm just like writing up a storm. Of course, you don't do anything, or I didn't do anything with that. It wasn't until much, much later I had submitted a few other things to Reader's Digest for their little slice of life type little anecdotes. And I submitted, never heard anything back, of course, but I submitted one to All in a Day's Work, and they accepted it.
Yay.
So I was like, I was like on cloud 9. In fact, I can tell you without too much trouble, it was a $300 check, which back then was a lot of money for that little bitty snippet I wrote. And along with it was a bumper sticker that read, I found money, fame, and glory. Reader's Digest bought my story.
Oh, wow. Where can I get one of those? Wow.
I was so encouraged.
Did you put it on your car?
And that, no, actually, I was, at the time, I spent many years working as a juvenile officer before I retired. And in my little cubicle, I had that pinned up on the wall so I could look at it every single day. But it's one of those things that when you have something like that happen, you start feeling encouraged to maybe do something more with it. So I started looking into writers groups in my area, ran across Saturday Writers and ended up getting involved there. And this was very early on, tiny little group at the time. But they brought in workshop speakers every month, as they do now. And I started realizing how little I actually knew about writing until I started attending those sessions. But you learn. That's how you start learning about what it takes to create a story, and there's so much that goes into it. So as I learned, I would submit pieces to the little local anthologies and get published in those. Started branching out, sending stories to Chicken Soup for the Soul, and was getting some acceptances there. In fact, I'm in 23 of the books now. And that's over a long period of time.
It's a great place those of you that are wanting those bylines, it's a great entry point, don't you think, Pat?
Absolutely. And they're great to work with. And it's another validation. It's like, oh my gosh, somebody liked it enough to take it. Because, for every one of their books, they get several thousand submissions. So it's not particularly easy to get in. So it is very much motivating.
Absolutely. It's better than your mom saying, oh, I love this.
Exactly. Because it's somebody who's looking to sell a product. And so it's like, hey, they liked what I did. I'm going to send some more things. It's just, there are a few things more motivating than that. But the bottom line, I guess, with my journey is one of the most important things you can do is get connected with writers groups. That's where you find people who are doing what you do, and they're going to encourage you and support you and help you on the journey. And you're going to learn a lot.
Absolutely. And for those of you that don't know, Saturday Writers is a chapter of the Missouri Writers Guild, which Pat and I are members of. And so whatever state you're in, most states have a Writers Guild, and they usually have chapters based on cities and areas in your state. And that can be a great community as well to plug in. That's a local meet in person. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. That's great, Pat. I love that story. So I love the fan fiction, right? Especially when you're younger, or your imagination, I think, as young people is more active. And I think that's the goal is as we get older, even if we're not writing, but just to remain creative and imaginative and still play like we're kids. I think that keeps us young. I don't think old is an age. I think a lot of it's a choice.
Well, and like I said, it's overwhelming to look at a blank page and like, I got to create people, and I got to create a story, and I got to create all of these things. The characters come to you ready made. You know them, or you wouldn't be interested enough to write fan fiction about them. So it's a nice springboard into, hey, maybe I can put together a story.
Absolutely. And here at Wayward Writers, we talk about conquering your path, whether it's traditional, self-publishing, hybrid. There's so many different choices. So can you share with us what choices you've explored and how you've decided which one is the best for you and your goals?
I just do describe myself as a hybrid writer. I started out traditionally published, and there were some other things I wanted to publish that I didn't think a traditional publisher would pick up. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and establish. I had a number of friends that had established their own imprints. So I decided I was going to go ahead and do that.
Pat,
so I
can
did.
I stop you just so for our listeners?
Sure.
What made you think, oh, a traditional publisher is not going to buy this? Like, what about it did you determine that?
Well, the particular thing I wanted to do was a collection of holiday themed
so a
short
niche
stories.
Kind of a niche market. Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So I thought, I will do this myself, and I will probably learn. And that is one of the things that I can tell you 1000%. If you are publishing, if you form your own imprint and you become your own publisher, you're going to learn a whole bunch about publishing business as a whole that you might not see if you only traditionally publish. So it's a huge learning curve and a learning experience, but I think it's been good for me to have that experience. But anyway, I tried to look at, for me, were the pros and cons of each pathway. In self-publishing, you're going to learn a whole lot about the business as a whole, every aspect of it, instead of just, I have to write the words and make them make sense and make a good story. And now, yay, I'm done. Because that's not the way it works when you're the publisher. I did like the control it offers. I can write the story I want to write. I don't have to worry about what somebody else wants me to write. I can have the cover designer of my choice. I can have the editors of my choice. And one biggie is I don't have to wait forever to see my book in print. I can publish it when I feel it's ready to be published, not when somebody else says, well, it doesn't fit into our schedule until sometime in 2026, So those things were all things I liked. The cons, there is an upfront cost when you publish your own stuff. Plus, you need to be organized. You need to keep track of all the things you need to do and when you need to do them. And there's a lot. So it does require some discipline. The traditional side, it can open some doors for you that may not be open to indies. And I think of a contest I wanted to enter one of my books in, and I was not able to enter it in that particular contest. And I knew it would have won, but I couldn't do it because it was indie published instead of traditionally published, which is aggravating. However, a lot of that is changing. It's not the same as it used to be. There isn't the upfront expense typically that you're going to have if you're publishing it yourself, because they're going to have on-staff people that are doing the editorial work, the cover design, and all of that sort of thing. Although for me, I would still have an editor look at my stuff before I would ever send it anywhere, because I wanted it to be the best it could be before I had anyone else look at it. And there might be some folks who still think it's more prestigious to be published by a traditional publisher than if you're doing it under your own imprint. But again, I think that also is changing. The cons for traditional, I ended up with a longer list for that. And one I alluded to already, it moves at a glacial pace.
That is very true.
It might take you years to find an agent. It might take you years to find a publisher, because some process you can submit to without an agent, not the big guys, but there are some you can do it without the help of an agent. You can go years to get a manuscript accepted. Let's say the day comes finally after years of trying, you get a contract, and then you find out when you sign that contract, it's going to be about another year and a half before you ever see it in print. So you have to be a lot more patient than what I have for that, I guess. The other thing is that with a traditional publisher, they're going to be the ones that make all the final decisions about your book. When it comes out, how, what the cover is going to look like, whether they want things changed about the story that you may or may not agree with, because you have signed a contract with them. You go along with what their final decision is, whether you like it or not. So that's what I would say are the negatives for traditional publishing. So you kind of just have to weigh all of that and find what works best for you. But I will say, I have friends who are New York Times bestselling authors that do both. They publish some of their own stuff and they use their traditional publishers for other things. So it is happening a lot that you see hybrid authors.
And I think it's grown so much. Years ago, it was a taboo that, people that didn't know how to write were self-publishing. So all self-published authors are like that. And it's not that case anymore. And I think a lot of times when you have the book in your hand, you can tell a lot about the author by the details. Like you own your own imprint, Pat. So like your books are gorgeous. And it used to be where you could look at a front cover and be like, oh, that was indie published. And it's not that way anymore. The product and quality is, excellent. Excellent. So I have to ask you, we're talking about time and being patient. So once you're done with a manuscript and you're like, okay, it's ready to go to market, how long does it take for the rest of the process before you have it in your hands and someone can buy it?
If I feel like it is ready to go, and like on Rose's book, I did a developmental edit. I had a developmental edit done. Then my regular editor looked at it and did copy edits. And then I had my proofreader. So 3 different eyes were on it. And then I went back in and did the final work on it. And of course, that takes some time. But gosh, once I feel like it's ready to go, I look for what the optimum date for me or time is going to be. Like if it's related to something,
like an event,
an event, or if it's related to. If there's something that I can tie it to that helps with marketing. But generally, and time of year, like Rose's book released at the end of January, where there isn't quite so much traffic from the big publishers. Like if you look at publishing in the fall, that's probably not a great time to do it because the big guys are pushing out for Christmas.
That makes sense.
So that's a lot of competition. So I think it's a little more effective to maybe look for a time that's not quite so trafficky with other stuff to compete against you. And the one thing I forgot to mention is this way they're the same for me. I did the pros and the cons for each. The way they're the same, and this is what I hear people say all the time. I'm like, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. They will say, oh, I want a traditional publisher because they're going to do all my marketing for me.
No.
And I'm like,
no. Let's talk marketing then, because that's a hard one for any way you publish. You were talking about looking at timing your release when you do that. How much marketing do you do before you set that release date, and what have you put in place before you ever put that book out there?
One thing I do before the book releases is I may start dropping little hints, little teasers about the book in my newsletter or on social media, just to pique some interest. But one thing I never ever do when I'm getting ready to release a book is do a cover reveal until I have an active buy link or pre-order link. Too often I see authors that will, and I get you're excited and you can't wait, to show off that beautiful cover. But the problem is you strike when the iron is hot. And when the iron is hot is when the reader first sees that cover. That's when they're going to be most motivated to click on a link. If you do your reveal and then weeks or a month or whatever later, you do the cover again with, oh, now you can order it. They're going to be like, oh, yeah, I already saw that, and scroll past it like it's old news almost to the reader. And I'm talking about social media, basically. They feel like they've already seen it.
It's nothing new. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's nice. Okay. And then move on. Whereas if you give them the buy link right away, the first time they see the cover, that's when I think they're most motivated to click on the link.
So do you use a street team, or what other ways do you use for marketing?
I've used Amazon ads, which is a whole thing in and of itself. There's so much involved with it. I post on social media. I give the information in my newsletter that it's coming up. That sort of thing is the bulk of it. I have not ever done a street team before until Rose's book release. And what I did was I did hire a launch leader. It was not exactly inexpensive, yet it was good because I was doing so many things during launch week. To have somebody else who was handling things for me was really helpful. I did a blog tour.
What did they handle for you, the launch leader? Do you mind sharing that?
Sure. We signed the contract, and it gives you a pretty long list of things that you're responsible for. And unfortunately, I don't have any with me.
No
so
worries.
I have to go from memory. It's been about a year ago, but I had to assemble the team. Now, she did bring in some people, but that was a difficult thing, getting people to commit to it. I don't know whether that makes them nervous or what, but I think I ended up with about 25, 26, something like that.
That's pretty good size launch team.
That's great, Pat.
Yeah. Pretty good size.
She had strict things that they had to read and agree that they were going to do. Now, whether they all do it or not is another story. But up front,
life intervenes,
right?
But what was lovely was she was doing all of the nagging to get
That's
them.
Great.
Okay, everybody. She was keeping the enthusiasm going, and she was keeping them riled up. Oh, now it's time. Today we're going to do this. Today we're going to share these graphics. And she was creating the graphics. Well, meanwhile, I was doing a blog tour, and I was doing interviews, and it was very wild week, but it was extremely helpful to have her to do that for me. So it's something, if you feel overwhelmed about handling all that yourself, is something to think about, if you can hire someone to do that for you.
You mentioned about the cover reveal, and something I've observed about your covers is most of them, because you write relatable women and do it well, it's usually we see the back side of the female, and sometimes the female is looking over their shoulder, sometimes they're not. Okay, can you talk about, obviously I know that's intentional because I know you enough to know that you are organized and intentional. So I guess one, how did that decision, how was that made? And also, have you been able to use the same cover designer to make sure your brand, because to me, when I see that, that is part of your brand now, that your books do that. Can you speak to that?
Sure. My first novel, obviously, it was traditionally published, so I didn't have a ton of say-so over the cover itself. However, I did say up front I did not want a full face on. And I tend to, even though, let me add that there's a lot of controversies. There's some people who think that's just awful that nobody ever shows the person's face. You know, you go into groups where they're discussing these things. If I see one more cover with the back of the woman, I'm going to scream. But for me, I want the reader to imagine what the person looks like. And that includes these two, which are my real people from history. There are pictures that exist. And at first, I had one that I wanted so bad. In fact, I'll show it to you. I wanted this painting that was done of Rose. I don't know how well you can see that. But I wanted that one so bad for the cover. And my designer looked at it and she said, there is no way we can do that. A, it's not the highest quality that you need for a good cover. And B, there can be copyright issues. So it was something that we had to put to the side and not do. And that made me sad, but I get it. Sure. You have to have a nice, clear image for, even if it's a real person from history and you have their photograph, using it is usually questionable because the quality of the photographs from long ago is just
the resolution's not there. Sure.
And then there's all the copyright issues too.
Right. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think your imagination can create a better picture than a photograph.
It's a luring mystery, you know, like what does she look like? Or
yeah, absolutely.
So how do you, Pat, measure success for each of your book projects? Or like what are your goals, your publishing goals for each book? Like, you know, how do you measure that success? What is success for you?
Well, of course I want to sell a lot of books.
Of course, we want to make money. Come on now, we all got to eat. There's no shame in that.
Absolutely. I mean, I want that book out there in as many hands as possible. So that is one thing that I look at. But I've never, and I know some people who are super, you know, if you're a super planner, you set your goal and I want to sell 50 books on the first day or whatever. I've never done that. I'm afraid I'd be setting myself up for disappointment and I don't want to do that. So I just look at where are we at? Are we selling books? How many books are we selling? What's my most successful book? Also look at the number of reviews that the book has gotten because those are important. Even though you're not going to get anywhere near the number of reviews that you have sales, which is sad, but people, for whatever reason, I don't know whether sometimes it's because they can't leave reviews. For example, Amazon, you have to sell or you have to purchase at least 50 bucks in the last month or 6 months or whatever. And some people don't, or maybe they're not on Amazon, so they can't leave reviews. But yeah, people seem to not leave. Every person who reads the book does not leave a review. But I do try to look at that because I encourage, like in my newsletter, I'll encourage, hey, if you haven't left a review, could you possibly leave one? That would be really helpful. I'm a bit of a contest hound.
Well, you've won a lot, though. Congratulations.
Because I like to enter. I enter way more than I win. But yeah, I like that because I like to have, again, validation that somebody who wasn't my mother likes my book.
Does that translate into sales? Do you see that translating into sales for you, or?
I don't think so, but I think it lends to your credibility when you, as finalists or as first, second, third, whatever, in various contests. But I will say one of the most satisfying things, they're all satisfying, but something else that's more intangible is when a reader says to you, I really loved your book, or I learned something I didn't know before, or I enjoyed it so much I had to go and Google more information because I was so interested in the topic that you wrote about. Those are the things that really make your heart sing. So those are the ways I measure it, which is probably not, from a marketing standpoint, the actual way that you should do it, but that's the way I do it.
You're at least trying to cover all of your costs and expenses and things like that too, and then measuring it from there. Or
that would be nice,
right?
Yeah, that would be nice.
That's a goal. See, you got a goal right there.
That is a goal. Yes. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're
okay.
Right.
So you've mentioned part of what you do is you have a newsletter that goes out. So what do you include in your newsletter for people who want to sign up and learn more?
One of the things that I try to do in each newsletter is, for one thing, I don't write big, long, lengthy articles in my newsletter. Those are short, to the point, little things of interest. And I will include an anecdote or two about my own personal life, what's going on with me. Maybe put in a little interesting piece of research that I found that's related to one of my books. And I put an image with each of these things. If there's something new going on with one of my books, I have a new release coming, I have an audiobook coming, I won a contest, whatever, I might put in a sentence or two about that. But my most popular feature is I always do a book giveaway every month. And they aren't my books. Well, occasionally it might be one of my books, but it will be other people's books. It's continental US entries only, because I will get an entry from another country and it costs like $50 to send it to.
You live and you learn, right? I mean,
yes, ma'am, you do.
Won't do that again.
For sure. It stays in my newsletter every month now, but I keep them short and to the point. I try to add a little bit of humor here or there. And that's pretty much the content, I would say.
That's great.
So this is a totally off the topic, what we're on. But I was wondering, when you put things out, self-publishing, can you get a hardcover first? Or is it all paperbacks?
Yeah, you can get a hardcover. I think Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing, I think you can get a hardcover there now. I've never done that, but I think you can, and I know you can if you publish through Ingram Spark.
Oh yeah, Ingram Spark. I think they're really great. I've heard a lot of really good things.
Yeah, they do hardcover.
I'm not endorsing them or anything like that. I have heard through the grapevine that they're good.
They are. Your costs will go up if you use them. Your cost per copy of the book that you publish will be more expensive through them than through Kindle Direct Publishing. So you have to factor that in. But it
makes sense. It makes sense because you're in catalogs and stuff like that you wouldn't normally be in. So you have several published books in some different genres. Will you share a couple blurbs about your historical fiction, like I Am Mrs. Jessie James?
That's my book that has sold the most copies and won the most awards. It is about it's told from the point of view of the woman who married the most infamous outlaw of the Old West. And writing that book was fascinating. And every book club I do related to that book, people are still 150 plus years later fascinated to this day, fascinated by the James family. So it's something that readers have really enjoyed reading. But spoiler alert, she does not have a real happy life, as you can probably imagine. I don't think that that's really too much of a spoiler alert, because you can't be married to somebody that everyone's chasing and not,
it doesn't end well.
Maybe have a few little discomforts in your life. Rose's story, I like writing women that are related to my home state of Missouri. Cool. And so I was actively searching for who I wanted to write about the last book, and ran across several that I thought were good candidates, but Rose stood out. And the more I read about Rose O'Neill, I absolutely fell in love with her. She was a true Renaissance woman, sculptor, writer, artist. At one time, the highest paid female artist in probably the world. And at one time, everyone knew her name. You look at the artwork that she did, she was so prolific. But she was also a suffragist, working for the vote, working to let women know you don't need to dress in corsets. You don't need to be all caged up, she called it. Men don't have that. Why should you? Why should we as women have it? You have the right to have a career. You should be able to make your own decisions. I mean, she was very much a woman who advocated for women. Well, long story short, when I started talking to people like in writers groups and other places, what do you know about Rose O'Neill? Everybody's like, who? They had no idea who she was. And I was like, that's not right. I have to write her. So that's what made the decision for me. But anyway, she did so many things. She deserves to be recognized for the things that she accomplished in a time when women were supposed to be at home taking care of the house and the kids. And she was very much not a part of that mold. She was out there working along with the other suffragists to change things for women. So, not really since she's a real woman from history, I'm not going to give you the blurb. I'm just going to tell you that those are the reasons I wrote her, and I want everybody to know who she is. And actually, I found that there are quite a few people around who still collect Kewpies of all things. There's some very heavy-duty collectors out there, and they've been great fun to deal with related to promoting this book.
That's cool.
So you like to write about women, and you like to write about their strong characters. What are some of the characteristics? Are you always doing historical fiction with a real woman, or are you building in other characters? And how do you build in those qualities that you want to show in your books?
When I'm writing a real woman, a real person from history, the script is there because they existed. It's not me creating that person. It's just letting the reader know who that person was. These two books feature as the major protagonist is the woman from history. The current piece I'm working on is a fictional character that I ran across. It will bring in a number of real people from history. So that said, I want a character that people can relate to. Because if they relate to that character, they are in fact going to enjoy reading about it because they see that person in
But
themselves.
how do you do that, Pat?
And I think, how do I do that? Oh gosh, it's I wave my magic wand.
That's it. Okay, good. Can I share? Can I borrow
buy one from you?
Can I borrow your wand?
Just wave the magic wand. That's all it takes. No, it's one of those things where you have to write the person in a way that, okay, they have their goals or their needs. They have these things that they think they want or that they actually want, and maybe that changes over the course of the book. They have obstacles that they have to cross or overcome in order to reach that goal. They fall down, they pick themselves up, they try again. And I think that's what happens with these women as they move through their lives to either reach that goal or find out maybe that wasn't the right goal for them, but the one that they found is just as satisfying. And I think to me, that totally is real life. That's the way we all are. And that makes it easy to connect with that character and also to root for that character. You want the character to succeed. So, because you kind of are seeing yourself, yeah, I'm having having difficulties. I'm having these things that happen. You know, I can give up or I can keep on trying. To me, that's what makes the character relatable to the reader, is that they can find that identity.
Right. No, that's huge.
Well, and I think too, what maybe is the challenge if they are not fictional is that you have to find those moments in their life, and they may not happen quite as close together or sequentially as you would like, right? Sometimes it takes us 15 years to accomplish something that we're trying to accomplish, whereas in the traditional fictional novel, we don't have to wait as long usually. Right. So maybe that's one of the challenges of nonfiction people.
Well, and with writing a real person from history, one of the challenges, you have to still make it into a story. They can't just be a biography of this happened and then this happened and this happened. There has to be still a story arc to the whole thing, which can be challenging too. There are a lot of things about Rose, for example, that I would love to have included, but it wouldn't add to the story. Mm-hmm. My first editor was like, oh, you don't need this at all. But I loved the scene and I had to cut it out because she was right. It really doesn't add to the story. So why is it in there? Well, because it's so interesting. Was not the correct answer. Right. So I ended up cutting
but
it.
That's like, isn't that like a bonus scene that you could put on your website or something like that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I absolutely. And I did save some of the cut scenes. I haven't really done anything with it yet, but yeah, it's probably a good idea never to throw away your stuff. Tuck it away somewhere.
You really don't know, right? And it's a great marketing material. It's great things for events, like to encourage people to come to an event instead of just buying your book, but it being an experience. So yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, so don't kill your darlings. Put them on ice.
There you go. Put them in the freezer.
Resurrect them later. That's pretty much the way it is.
When you are writing about women from the past, how do you deal with current social mores? And do you stick, strictly to the historical information, or do you adjust that for the modern day reader?
First of all, I want to stay true to the time period. I don't want to have a jet plane fly over, in 1815 or whatever. I try to stay true to the how the character would think during that time period. Like in Rose's case, she was not necessarily representative of the mores of her time period, but that was her. She was out marching to get the vote. Most women were not. And many women thought, why are you doing that? This is a terrible idea that you should be putting that horrible responsibility on us, which surprised me. But so basically she went against the grain. But if you're writing a fictional character, then you're making other kinds of decisions about what you're going to do. Like for an example would be, again, for Rose, spent a lot of time in the Ozarks. And at that time, the dialect was very strong. But for me to write the dialect of the hill people and the way they were talking would have been a caricature to today's reader. So what I do instead is suggest it. Like you can have them speak, but maybe put in a word or two that would be reflective of how they would speak instead of hammering the reader over the head with it. I never, then this is me, I know other folks do, but racially offensive words I do not use in my writing, even though they may have been very commonly used at the time. I think you can, again, suggest by, he said that word that made him cringe or whatever. You can suggest it without using it. And again, there are plenty of people who say, no, that's what they said at the time. That's what I'm going to use. And that's the author's decision. But for me, I don't. That's just a couple of examples of how I modify a little bit what I do to be more appealing, I think, to the modern day reader without being untrue to the period of time that I'm writing.
Sure.
Good tips for us. Thanks.
Pat, where can we find your books?
Yes.
Probably the easiest thing to do is go to my website, which is www.patwahler.com. And it has a little bit more about me. And it has all my books there. But really, my books can be found any place books are sold or can be ordered in any place books are sold. I have to advocate for my local bookstore, which is, I adore Main Street Books in St. Charles. I've worked with them for a long time. Love them to pieces. Most bookstores do have a special section for local authors. So for anybody who publishes that you don't see your books in the bookstore and would like to, then develop a relationship with your local bookstore and offer to work with them on getting the books in. Sometimes they can get them cheaper from you than they can ordering them in. So it's something to think about, but yeah, they can be great advocates for your books. them and book clubs, which I also adore. Book clubs. I love doing book clubs, and it's great to make a connection with a book club. It will do wonders for your career.
Great. Wonderful tips and such interesting.
Thank you so much for being with us, Pat, and sharing how to write relatable women and historical fiction.
I appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Wayward Writers.
Let's connect. Find us at waywardwriters.com, X, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
See you next time. Conquer your path.